Okay, a call to order this March 5th, 2025 workshop meeting of Borough Council. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We begin with citizens to be heard. So is there anybody who would like to be heard on any issue of borough government here tonight? See nothing. Is there anybody on Zoom staff?
Nobody with their hand.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll have another opportunity later on if a hand does go up. Next, I'll entertain a motion, council, to review and approve the February 5th, 2025 workshop meeting minutes. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Motion by the Deputy Mayor. Is there a second? Second. Second by Councilor Stubbe. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Next up is a biosolids management plan presentation by our friends at Gannon Fleming. So if you'd like to take the podium. Exciting stuff. We're happy to have it. It is. It really is.
Thank you.
Doesn't sound exciting, but
Yeah.
I'm sure it will by the time you're done.
I'll do my best to really spice things up. Thanks, everyone. I just want to do a quick introduction. I'm Ben Briston, Gannon Fleming, Senior Project Manager. I'm joined by my boss over here, newly minted Water Business Lead, Jamie Shambaugh. I believe folks might know him already. And then my ex-colleague who started his own firm, Nick Sod. I believe everyone knows Nick. But yeah, I'm here to talk about our biosolids management plan. This is the report, so I'm going to try to boil this down. I was told I have 15 minutes to talk about this, so I'm going to try to boil this down into this 15-minute presentation. So here is a quick agenda. The last time we were here on November of 2023. So I'm being told that there's 2 new council members, so this might be familiar to those that have been here since November of 23. So I guess bear with us. But yeah, so this agenda here is what we'll be talking about today. Current biosolids handling process. We'll get into this study that I just showed you all. We'll talk about our detailed alternatives evaluations. We looked at 4 different potential processes. And then I'll get into comparing those alternatives, followed by a cost summary, and then our selection of our preferred alternative. Okay. So first, our current biosolids plan at the Carlisle wastewater treatment plant. So as you are probably well aware, the current process at the wastewater treatment plant is a liquid lime slurry stabilization. That's been utilized for coming up on 40 years now, and it has been a low-cost program, but it does rely on outdated equipment at this point, and the end project is marginal at best. And that final bullet there, number 3, it does require over 7 million gallons of that Class B liquid solid to be hauled annually. So that's 1,200 tanker loads. Okay, so this is a schematic of that current process. Sludge is sent from the clarifiers to the gravity thickeners. There are some, I don't know if folks can see that or not, but there are some highlights as to issues that are experienced at the plant. There's one there at the gravity thickeners and the sludge holding tanks, which are nuisance odors. At the sludge holding tanks, there's a lime slurry addition, and there are maintenance challenges there. And then finally, from those sludge holding tanks, that liquid stabilized sludge is either hauled, or when it can't be land applied, it is sent through the belt filter press at the plant. And again, there's nuisance odors there at the final discharge locations. Okay, so this slide here basically details kind of what I hit on already. You know, it's been a reliable process, but it does present some operational difficulties, which I touched on. The largest of which are those nuisance odors and some complaints from the neighbors, as well as premature equipment failure, clogging problems. Like I mentioned, there have been some complaints that have been received from those nuisance odors, and there has been a negative public perception of that process. Okay, so next I'd like to talk about this study that we have undertaken. The main goal for the study was to develop a plan that is affordable, cost effective. We wanted to make sure it's energy efficient as well as environmentally sound, that will last you guys 25 years, hopefully much more than that. What goes into an effective biosolids program? That it'll provide you a direction for the future. We'll consider to diversify the outlets in the end use options that you would have for your biosolids, and we don't want to hide from any risks. We want to acknowledge those and understand them, and fully work to mitigate any risks associated with the new program. As a part of our plan, we also looked at the regional landscape. So as part of our report, we did look at kind of existing markets, as well as competing products, and then the local and state regulatory constraints. So this slide details our tasks, like how we stepped through this process. I added some dates on the right side of the slide, and there were a series of tech memos, and those were all delivered in April of 2023. That first task was to assess what's going on at the plant, what those existing conditions look like. In addition to that, we provided a technical memorandum detailing the regulatory landscape, and we provided an end-use market survey. And finally, we talked with you folks and developed our non-economic decision criteria to rank these various alternatives. And from there, we developed our preliminary alternatives. I believe this was a significantly long list of alternatives. And from there, we boiled it down to 4. Those 4 alternatives were investigated thoroughly, as folks that reviewed this report could attest to. And we have developed over the past year, we've developed this final report that summarizes all of our work. Okay, so I wanted to hop into the 4 different alternatives that we looked at for this biosolid study. And this is a table directly from the report. The first alternative there is the post-lime treatment. That is what is currently existing at the wastewater treatment plant. Second alternative is autothermal thermophilic aerobic digestion. I'm going to try not to say that again in this presentation. I'll leave it to ADAT. The third process is anaerobic digestion plus thermal drying. And the final alternative that we did look at was thermal drying with pyrolysis. Okay, so on the first alternative that we looked at, like I mentioned, is the post-line treatment. And this is a schematic. This is courtesy of Carter Machine Company, a belt filter press manufacturer. This pretty much summarizes the approach for that post-lime treatment process. By the way, if there are any questions, or we can discuss those at the end, but if something pops to mind, just try to get my attention and we can discuss that at this point. But the post-lime treatment opportunities and challenges or pros and cons that I want to highlight. This treatment process does have a lower capital cost. It's a simpler operation. It reuses existing infrastructure. Um, you folks know how this works. It's similar technology to what is currently going on at the wastewater treatment plant, and it's proven. However, there are a few cons with this alternative. Um, Nuisance odors. I think I've mentioned that a few times already in the presentation. There is a significant volume of biosolids that is created from this process. I touched on the high hauling and disposal costs associated with it. Quicklime handling is super messy, and pathogen regrowth. There is potential for those pathogens to regrow with this process. And then there is a limited use for the final product, or the final cake. The next process that I wanted to talk about quickly is the ATAD process. This is a schematic from Thermair. This is their the process that we pulled from their site. This, I don't want to get into the technical details, but I did want to point out that there are a few local installations of this process here in Central PA. Lower Allen and Middletown wastewater treatment plants utilize this process. So from a pro, con, or opportunity challenge perspective, this process does provide a much more significant reduction in solids. We state here that's greater than 50% reduction than what you currently have. It also reuses existing infrastructure, so that's a positive there, and it is proven. A challenge, there is a moderately high cost associated with this. At the end of the presentation, I get into the details of our cost estimates. It's super energy intensive, so there's high electrical costs associated with it. Foam control is needed, and odor control is necessary to prevent those nuisance odors. And the dewatering for this process can be challenging. It is slightly more complex than that first alternative that I spoke to. And finally, there's a limited use for cake, that final product beyond land application. The next option that I wanted to speak to is anaerobic digestion and thermal drying. On the right side of this slide here is another process diagram for this alternative. Again, don't want to get into the details unless you folks want to get into the technical details of this process. However, I've personally seen a lot of anaerobic digestion, and from a location perspective, we did have a few site visits to investigate this alternative. Hanover Wastewater Treatment Plant utilizes this process. There was a site visit taken to that plant back in August of 2023. Same with Lancaster Area Sewer Authority. They use a similar process, and again, a site visit was taken to see that process there at that wastewater treatment plant. I'm going to list a few other ones: City of Hagerstown, Maryland, Borough of Chambersburg, City of Lebanon Authority, Derry Township Municipal Authority, East Penn Borough, Borough of Lewistown. I'll stop there. You guys kind of get the gist. In addition, I mentioned that this is anaerobic digestion plus thermal drying. So this process would include that thermal drying, which is basically a heat drying of that dewatered biosolids. This does reduce that end product by 90% compared to that dewatered cake volume that comes out. There are two types of dryers, a direct and indirect. And there are many different types of dryer technologies out there, and they provide a wide range of end products. For this process, it is recommended that a direct drum dryer is utilized. Opportunities and challenges. So, an opportunity for anaerobic digestion and thermal drying, there is an energy recovery potential to utilize that biogas from this process. Again, there's a similar volume reduction and odor. There is odor reduction and mitigation associated with this process. It's anaerobic. It's all covered. Those tanks are covered. Both Class A biosolids and Class B biosolids can be produced. I'll get into that a bit more further on in the presentation. Like I said, it's a proven technology, and there are construction phasing opportunities with this process. From a challenge perspective, there is a higher capital cost associated with this process. It's a bit more complex to operate and maintain, and there are larger footprint requirements. So new tankage would be required for this process. And finally, the fourth alternative that we looked at is thermal drying and pyrolysis. So the pyrolysis process, that second bullet there, I think sums up nicely. An example of this is wood conversion to charcoal. Pyrolysis is a process that heats in the absence of oxygen. So this technology is emerging. We did our research. There's one wastewater treatment plant in the U.S. that utilizes this technology. This is utilized across the pond in Europe more so than here. And there are a few companies that we've coordinated with over the lifespan of this report, to be specific, Char Technologies and Pyrig. So really my main point on this slide is that this technology is new and ever evolving. So the pyrolysis process, it does reduce the end product by 90% compared to that incoming dewatered cake volume. That final point, I guess I could touch on that quickly. There is no digestion associated with this option, so there's no tankage, similar to the 80 AT. You have aerobic digester tanks with the anaerobic. Third alternative, you have tankage. This does not include that tankage. This does not require that. There is a market for the biochar, which is the product that is produced, so that is able to be sold. That third bullet there, there's studies and data to date that does show that PFAS and related compounds aren't present in the final product of biochar, but like I said, that is still evolving and changing. We had a conversation. It seems to be changing week to week with new studies coming out. Pros and cons for this option 4. From an opportunity perspective, there's potential to recover the energy produced. There's lower O&M costs. There's a significant volume reduction there, so larger than those option 2 and option 3. And like I mentioned on that last slide, there's a potential for PFAS destruction. From a challenge perspective, there's a higher capital cost. It's more complex to operate and maintain. And like I said, it's an emerging technology. Okay, so I want to touch on the comparison of these alternatives. I think this slide provides some decent information here and a nice graph. So each of these alternatives do provide you with a Class A biosolid, so your highest quality biosolid. I want to point out the chart and kind of that shows the reduction in the volume, the output for each of these alternatives. Furthest to the left on that chart, if you can see, that's the post-lime treatment in the annual wet tonnage that's produced from that. Second line there on that bar chart is alternative number 2, ATAD, and that's about a 45% decrease in that solids volume. And then, as you see, you just get lower and lower with that third anaerobic digestion and drying option, which is almost 11% less of a annual wet tonnage that we calculated. And finally, the pyrolysis provides the least amount of annual wet tons, about 6% compared to that alternative 1. This slide should look familiar. This pretty much takes all of those pros and cons that I spoke about already and summarizes them in one slide. So I'm not going to get into each of these bullet points. Whenever I was looking at this in preparation, I did highlight a few to me that I might be getting ahead of myself, but a few that are almost non-starters or fatal flaws with some of these options. Nuisance odors for that option 1 with the post-lime treatment, and then for the pyrolysis, the fact that it's an emerging technology is also another kind of non-starter for that alternative 4. This table provides a summary of our costs. Each of these include a 30% contingency, and I looked back at that last presentation that most of you have reviewed. One of the changes here was on the alternative 4. I think that was a lot lower. I have 21.2 million last time we met. That obviously has increased. There's a different type of technology. We learned that there's a different type of dryer that's required, a belt dryer as opposed to a drum dryer. So those costs really escalated whenever we coordinated with the manufacturer there for that process. This table summarizes the annual O&M costs associated with each of the 4 alternatives. I'll leave that up there for a second for you folks to digest. And finally, 20-year net present worth cost analysis was completed. You can see how alternatives 2 and 3 kind of equal out there, with that alternative 4 being the costliest, and alternative 1 being the least expensive. Again, that option 4, that was originally $36.5 million dollars the last time we met, and that has escalated significantly since we last met with you folks. Okay, on to the selection of our preferred alternative. There's a significant amount of text on this slide, but I do think I think each bullet point is important. Like I mentioned, we looked at economic, operational, and maintenance and environmental considerations whenever we analyzed each of these alternatives. And number 3, that anaerobic digestion with thermal drying, best meets the borough's needs with the least trade-offs. That first bullet point, it's a proven technology. Every plant operator that I've spoken to, they've really stressed the need for flexibility and redundancy, and this option provides that. The second bullet point there, it does provide a Class A biosolids production for this alternative. It minimizes the odor potential at the plant as well as the off-site locations. And I mentioned already the significant reduction in volume of the material that needs to be sent off site. The other item I want to speak to on this one, it kind of ties back to the redundancy. If a piece of equipment such as that dryer is out of service, a Class B product could still be produced. Whereas a few of these other options, say with pyrolysis, if that reactor goes out, then there's not an option there to kind of figure out how to get rid of that sludge. And finally, that final bullet I want to speak to, pyrolysis can be added in the future should PFAS be regulated and that technology becomes proven. The best way that I could kind of phrase it is you don't want to be the first person to try out the new technology. You kind of want to let others be that guinea pig, is how I've kind of thought about it. And with that, that's the end of the presentation. I think I kept it hopefully to 15 minutes, but open up to any questions.
Yeah, I have one. So in that option, one of the challenges you had that a larger footprint was required.
Yes.
So we have space available for that?
We do. We have space available. I'm envisioning the site plan in my mind. Is that to the south?
The south of the existing sludge holding tanks and to the west of
To the west.
space available
Okay.
in the existing site, and it's grouped with the other solids handling processes. So
And then should eventually the pyrolysis technology become available, would there be a space issue for incorporating that, or?
We've in this report we did provide layouts, and we provided a footprint,
Okay.
an area for that to be added in the future. That would be something that for this alternative 3 we wouldn't do the design for the pyrolysis, but we'd make sure that we considered connections and footprint availability and things like that.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so with option 3, the digestion and thermal drying, with it being more complex in terms of like operation and maintenance, would there be a need for additional staff hiring for that, or is it more just training, to basically just training staff to ensure they're up to speed on the new process, essentially?
Yeah, we did touch on that in the report. We started having discussions on that, utilizing the staff that is currently doing the lime stabilization, kind of pivoting their roles to this proposed process. I know one of the questions was to estimate kind of manpower requirements and kind of what goes into operating and maintaining this system that I think we're going to be diving into a bit more. I don't know if that answers your question or not. Yeah.
I've got a few questions. I guess what are the because this is kind of going fairly close to the Conde de Gwinnett, what are there any like vulnerabilities to any of this equipment with like flooding or are there any I guess are certain parts of it more resilient to that? I guess that's just my first question.
So thinking through the anaerobic, the tankage, this anaerobic digestion, these would be tanks, and then we would also have 2 buildings. So from a flooding perspective, all that equipment would be housed in these buildings, so I wouldn't see any issues with flooding there. And the dewatering equipment and that would all be in the centrifuge, and that equipment would also be housed in that existing structure. So I don't envision any sort of flooding issues.
Yeah, the locations outside the floodplain and these the digesters are going to be at a slightly higher elevation actually than the existing tank is you have there, so these would fly after the rest of the pipe.
And then I guess so the digester can take food waste. I guess since we're kind of the borough's exploring maybe bringing waste hauling in house, like what like so I think of like my own waste and how like what we generate, like we generate a lot of like cat litter and poop and like I have a 2.5-year-old son at home. I guess like what other, if people were to be purchasing like compostable items, are those capable of going into the anaerobic digester? Or is that sort of like, could we haul that and take it there instead of having to pay the dump to take it?
Nick, I don't want to put you on the hot seat here, but
Yeah, when we talk about all waste to a digester, we're usually looking at food waste or grease from restaurants. That's if the waste can be introduced. So it's usually a third party that has a tanker truck, 5,000, 3,000 gallon truck that's coming in. Now, individuals. So there are opportunities for additional waste hauled in to add to a digester. Like some of those examples, probably not so much, but mostly high organic materials, food waste is a good example. Other industries could have waste that are good for a digester. And of course, fast food restaurants. Lots of out there's grease interceptors, and it's like candy with digester.
My last question is just, I guess, what is the potential for like cogeneration with the, like in terms of generating electricity off of this? Would it just sort of be covering the plant operations, or could there be?
So gas digestion, so the anaerobic digester will produce gas or biogas, and then it's used to heat oil, and then it's used to heat the digester itself, because it has to be heated and mixed. Additional extra heat can sometimes be used for heating of different buildings at the site. There are opportunities for more advanced use of that digester gas, but really, for generators, for turbines and things like that, oftentimes you find that it's cost prohibitive. It's not good to pay that for that type of system, but the opportunities there in the future when it does become something that's cost effective, there are.
I think we'll mostly look to use it in the digester and the dryer process up here, so we shouldn't have excess gas beyond that.
I had a question. I am the daughter of a former wastewater treatment plant employee. So growing up, I heard the word sludge a lot. So some of this is very familiar, but also new. In that I think that he worked at the wastewater treatment plant whenever they had originally introduced the technology in like 1982. So new era. Some things that I like about the pyro one, sorry, is that it could potentially be added in the long term. I think that that's a really valuable tool that I would love to see in addition. And I agree that the economics doesn't necessarily work out. I also don't want us to be afraid of trying new technology just because it's new. I mean, you said that they use it in Europe, and like, how long have they been using it in Europe? Is it more than 10 years? It seems like the Silicon Valley wastewater treatment plant is using it too. So, like, just because something is emerging, I don't want us to necessarily shy away from it. However, the economics, again, are a little scary. Um, I'm also interested in knowing if the economics would change as, again, it becomes more apparent domestically. And it could be something that we could, again, look into adding in the future. That being said, I did want to ask how long Hanover, you mentioned Lancaster, Chambersburg, have been using the the third option, which we are seriously considering, How long have they been using that, and like how is it different from being like emergent?
Yeah, and maybe Nick can add to that, but each of those systems varies, but they've been many years for those systems.
It's probably, I think, probably 6 or 8 facilities in central PA that have anaerobic digesters. I think they were designed to build in the 70s or maybe even earlier. So they've been around for 40, 50 years. So it's a tried and true technology.
I could also add to that. There are any number of industrial manufacturing facilities that also use anaerobic digesters, so it is definitely a widely used.
Great. I just wanted to like have that for people's information. And then also, you had mentioned about like selling the Class A biosolids. I wanted to know like sort of like what sort of revenue did that generate?
Yeah,
Well, so there's really not a big market for selling biosolids. Um, the best we know, in most cases, we give away without incurring costs. Um, so the first alternative, line post-line treatment. The second alternative being the patented aerobic digestion process. They both produce a cake that really is only suitable for plant application. The other two alternatives, aerobic digestion and dry vacuum and pyrolysis, produce other types of material that are potential for other markets. Those markets aren't really fully developed at the moment. Pyrolysis, the one selling point is that some of the systems that sold in Europe and other places, they have a market where polygrade biochar can be used as black ink for printing, like t-shirts and things.
yeah, they're working lots of producing Class A biosolids. So even though it gives them a lot of flexibility, there's not there's not competition to biomass, so that limits that. As opposed to the biochar where there's limited production of biochar. So even though you could, in theory, sell it and have folks take it home and put it on their gardens, etc., it's not really. I'm looking at it from the standpoint of having this market markets.
The select alternative would be aerobic digestion and drying sort of help could be used for soil as a soil blend for landscapers. There are like golf courses that take that and apply it as fertilizer. So there are options out there, but there's no big markets per se. I just have to kind of find those people and kind of create the market the other way of that picture.
Any other questions? Okay, I have questions. I wait for everybody else. Sorry. Kind of good segue into that, and one I didn't realize Council Roos and I were both descended from sewer plant workers. So I spent a lot of time around sewage plant. My dad retired about 15 years ago, so in my youth, I'd spend time with him there. Fun times. That's when I said this was exciting stuff, I meant it. The jumping off of the uses of the pellets. I mean, my understanding is that we don't have really good studies about PFAS and what effect anaerobic digestion may have on that. So we can't really rely on any reduction of PFAS from this process, where we probably could with pyrolysis. That's fair to say.
Yeah, that's fair to say. I think we do see, whether it's in the water process or the wastewater process, you will see some reductions in PFAS throughout, but we wouldn't approach that from that standpoint.
Yeah, nothing of great significance that if regulation does come down, that it's going to do the trick for us, right? Yeah, and so then in any kind of when the pellets are used for whatever they're used, if they're used at golf courses or where else, we're potentially then contributing to further spread of PFAS. We don't have a lot of good options right now at the moment. I get that, but I just think we all need to be aware and cognizant of that. Again, just correct me if I'm wrong. Just trying to make sure.
No, that's correct. The advantage of the first part of this process is that it is amenable to the addition of future processes to specifically address those contaminants of concern. As well as in the interim, as Ben was showing on some of the slides, the volume reduction in the event that you were somehow prohibited from doing like the application of remand and additional process, you have the advantage of that significant volume reduction in the event you had to landfill or do something else with it. So, again, that kind of goes back to speaking to the reliability, redundancy, and flexibility that Ben was talking about there, that provides you these options to react to changing regulations and standards and those kind of things.
Okay. And then jumping off of what Councilor Shiles was talking about, or I think through that exchange, the food waste potential here. Are we talking about I wrote it down, I forget what the FPR stands for, food processing residuals, and that those could potentially be used in these anaerobic digesters? Because I know there are issues that they're having in the area with FPRs being spread on fields and the stench coming from those. And maybe this is a better process for that if it goes in the anaerobic digester where there's odor control.
If there is, that is a possibility. Yes.
Okay.
The type of food waste could be introduced to a digester.
Okay, great. And then not just sort of comment. I've been on council probably too long before I was mayor, and about probably 18 years ago or so, Councilor Heineman and I had a meeting with the then borough manager and then the public works director about trying to get anaerobic digesting of the plant, and we were kind of poo-pooed away and, like, you crazy people. So it's nice to kind of see this come full circle now as I'm probably ending my last few years here as an elected official here in Carlisle. But it's good to see this kind of come around. So thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, move on to Public Works. Follow that, Jeff.
Yeah. Hopefully my presentation will be relatively short. It's mostly an update. So we wanted to just give you an update on this Bedford and East traffic calming project. And before we dive into it, I thought we'd just remind ourselves as kind of what it entails. We received several complaints about speeding. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. You've got two one-way corridors, both have 2 lanes in each direction. And as we know from human driver behavior, people tend to travel at the speed that they feel comfortable. So if it's a nice wide open roadway, no oncoming traffic, it's easy for them to pick up speed even unintentionally. So we worked with Dahlwood Engineering to develop a menu of traffic calming options. And they produced a set of concept plans, which we shared about a year ago at the Eastside Neighbors meeting. And in addition to the menu, we looked at reverse angle parking, we looked at parking protected bike lanes, and we even looked at a mini roundabout at the intersection of East and Bedford. And the feedback that we got primarily was that the reverse angle parking, there seemed to be a lot of issues associated with that and concerns about the operations. Plus, it also takes up a little bit of additional right-of-way when you have a car at an angle. It does produce more spaces in theory, but if your areas for that parking are somewhat disjointed, then you wind up not gaining that advantage. But we did get positive feedback on the roundabout and especially the parking protected bike lanes. So as a result of that, we looked at 3 different options for how to move forward, because we can look at this as different ways of investing in different amounts with various outcomes. And so option one, we were looking at striping only. So what this would mean is that all the improvements would just be lines painted on the road, no physical barriers whatsoever. But as you can imagine, that option is pretty easy to implement. And then option two is what we call a quick design, and that's where we take things like flexible delineators and quick curb, items that are physical that can be bolted into the pavement, but are also temporary in nature, meaning that they can be removed. And then option three is more of a permanent solution. We'd use actual concrete and macadam to implement those changes. So looking at option one with the striping only, as I mentioned, it's the cheapest. One of the major advantages is it's more of a true pilot. We can try these different things. It doesn't cost that much. We can see what works, what doesn't. And then the other advantage is that we were, if you may recall, we were part of a multi-municipal Safe Streets for All grant application, which we did receive. Lower Paxton Township is spearheading that grant, and I give a lot of credit to Jared for coming up with that concept and working with the group to come up with that concept of putting in these kind of quick build improvements in place so that we can try different things without having to invest too heavily. I guess the major con associated with this is that because there's no physical separation, we may not get the desired results as effectively because technically people could just drive over the line if they don't pay attention to it. Then for option two, it is more costly for sure, both in terms of design and even more so for construction. But with these quick builds, it still is kind of a pilot. It just gives you a little more protection with these physical pieces that are put into the road. But now when we put something physical into the road, there are some operational challenges that we have to overcome. We'd have to think about street sweeping. We'd have to think about snow removal. Probably even need to buy additional pieces of equipment, not to mention figure out the staffing and how that would work to achieve those maintenance issues. And then option three, the full design, it's obviously the most effective. It's the quote best. But with the other two, you have that ability to evaluate it before you invest that money. I guess the other disadvantage of the full design right now, given that we have the SS4A grant, those funds would not be able to be used for this purpose because the SS4A funds are for either a quick build or a striping only. So, with that, it's our recommendation that we move forward with option one. It's the lowest level of financial commitment and allows us to see what works and what doesn't before investing in a more permanent solution. So we'll take that to you at a future council meeting and request action on one of the three options. And depending on which one it is, either way, for any of those three options, we would still work with Dalwood to produce that set of design plans that eventually could be put out to bid. And hopefully I didn't go too fast, but certainly open to questions.
Yeah, Jeff, is there an option maybe to do sort of a hybrid of one and two, where maybe at critical points, using those what are the flexible plastic bollards, like at the chicane and that sort of thing, where you really need drivers to follow the lines, and otherwise they might. So then maybe we're somewhere in between those cost options.
Yeah, good question. If we went with the striping only, then we could probably even use Borough forces to bolt down some of those flexible delineators in certain spots. We'll still have to think through the operational issues in terms of street cleaning and snow removal. But yeah, there would be that too. And if we went with a striping only plus, they would be eligible for the SS4A funding as well.
Right. Okay.
How much of the either the quick design or the striping would be eligible for the matching funds you said? How much potentially would be able to be covered through those matching funds? I'm just kind of curious as to like how that would ultimately impact the cost to the borough for either of those options.
Yeah, those are 80-20 grant funding. So um, I have to remind myself of what those numbers are. Didn't have them memorized, but if we had for the striping only, when it's all said and done, um, it'd be about 60,000 in terms of our match for the 300,000 total, roughly.
Um, did you? Okay.
I really do have more
I guess
questions, but I'm
Go
just in thinking about like we had or you had sort of put those sort of temporary speed bumps on West or East Lowther.
Yes.
Is there potential to sort of with the SS4A money to like use some of those, in this design, and then potentially, I mean, they seem to hold up pretty well and be somewhat reusable. Like, if we find that we don't need them maybe in certain areas, or we want to keep them in certain areas, you reuse them in another quick deployment sort of bike lane later or something like that.
Yeah, that definitely would be an option. We'll see. I mean, we've put them down for a couple seasons now. I mean, there's no doubt when you bolt something into the pavement, it's gonna wreck it a little bit. So we may even come up with some solution of filling those holes with a crack seal or something like that. If we start doing this in more locations and we see that it's damaging the road, but yeah, I would say that would also fit into a striping plus option. Again, we typically remove them to make sure we don't wreck our plows. So we remove them. They're more seasonal in the winter.
And then I guess I think it makes sense to do the striping, but it would be nice to see sort of a quick build at particularly around intersections where there's a lot of conflict between drivers and cyclists, and it's just to sort of like make sure that people are protected at those kind of more vulnerable areas. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, I think that for the most part, it shouldn't be overly difficult. We might even be able to use borough forces to implement those pieces, but it is possible, just being fair, that depending on what we would decide to do, it may require a little bit extra in the design cost, but it should be negligible.
So just kind of, I guess, maybe out of curiosity, if the long-term goal is more permanent work along this route, and we're viewing this as kind of a pilot phase, would it be more beneficial to go with a quick design option because it would provide a better picture of what permanent, like a permanent solution or permanent work on this corridor would look like, to kind of get a feel not only for how it might affect traffic patterns, but also for what maintenance or snow removal might need to look like, assuming like down the road there's more permanent changes put in. I mean, I do appreciate that it's slightly more costly than the striping, but it's still significantly lower cost than doing the full design along the corridor. So I guess just kind of like throwing that thought out there.
Yeah, I mean that is a possibility, but you just have to decide what level of investment. And I think if I mentioned that Dawood created a menu of options, and so um, I think that if we wanted to do that, maybe that striping plus could be a place if there are strategic areas. But yes, your question is spot on, and that is, if we went with that option, it would be a little bit more definitive. It would give us a little bit better idea, and it would cost more.
And that cost is, I mean, just because I know we jumped through those slides, the cost of striping only, the estimate's $295,000. The Quick Design's 380,000, so it's about 17,000 or so more based on the 20% match. So just to give a sense of what we're talking about as far as borough dollars are concerned.
But then you have to take into consideration the additional maintenance work that will need to be done and equipment that will be needed for snow and street sweeping.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, these costs are for design and construction only. It doesn't account for the operational costs.
So for just for the costs in general, it's that we have these matching grants. So if we would say approve the striping only in a future upcoming meeting, and you said about going out to bid, like how soon could we implement something like this? In theory.
Yeah, trying to recall what Dawood's estimate was on the design. I think it was less than a year. The potential, the reason I'm hesitating is the potential holdup is that we don't have that agreement yet with Lower Paxton. It would be really nice to have that agreement in place before we start expending money on this. So that's just something to consider also.
Yeah, I mean, I just appreciate how much time's already gone into it, and one of my favorite plans ever for the borough was from the 70s that was going to pedestrianize the square, and it breaks my heart that it's on a shelf somewhere. Anyway, I want the work to be actually used, is what I'm saying, and so I do appreciate the expediting of it to ensure that we at least get some momentum with the idea that we can still go forward, but maintenance and all those costs. So I'm foreseeing something happen as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also did want to
Go ahead.
I also did want to say that while you had said that nothing was going to be physically installed with the striping, you do have the free physical barrier of the people parking their cars in offering now a protected bike lane, which I think is a really great return on investment and helps alleviate some of the bike v car pedestrian things that we're trying to help mitigate. And so I do really, really like that. And this sort of free physical barrier that we're getting with cars that are going to be parked there during all hours of the day. So I like that.
I have what's maybe a dumb question, but I conceptualize can get what the striping only is, right? It's just the line painting. The full design is basically the whole shebang. We saw mock-ups of it. When we're talking about quick design and temporary installation of things, what would that look like? What are we putting down? Is it kind of temporary speed bumps, as Councilor Shiles brought up, or is it that and any number of other things? I guess I'm just kind of in my mind having difficulty conceptualizing what that means or what that looks like, I guess.
Sure. So the flexible delineators are basically a little rubberized platform that has a plastic pole with a reflective piece on it, and so that would be installed along the roadway. So you'd have a visual differentiation, you'd have a slightly physical differentiation. I mean, the reality is a car could just drive over it, but it would know it if it hit it. So it's just a little bit more protective.
And that would be going along the bike lane. Is that kind of a delineator along the bike lane, essentially? Okay, gotcha.
And if I may add, the concept with the quick design with the delineators, it would run alongside the bike lane, so between the bike lane and the parked car. So that gives us a limited width, a bike lane that we are challenged with. How do we do street sweeping? To the curb. So at the staff level, we talked about what kind of equipment would we have to procure, what additional labor will be involved. I know we have Corey Blythe here. He was even trying to be such a team player. He said, "Well, I guess we could take them out each week we were cleaning." That's not an option. So we had an in-depth discussion on that. I like the idea if you can marry a hybrid and use the delineators maybe in certain areas, but that is the drawback right now for us, or for your manager, a hurdle there. It'd be nice to test the paint to see if it is being effective, that the bicyclists are feeling safe between the parked car and the curb, or if we're seeing too much encroachment by parked cars to the curb and that delineators may be needed. So I think this provides you a lot of flexibility to build upon as we move forward.
And sorry, just to clarify again, with the striping option, I mean, conceptually, we're talking about that putting the parking protected bike lane along both corridors and essentially reducing both streets to one lane. Is that what the striping would do? That basically just those two things?
Yes.
What happens if we do the striping and the striping's not effective in changing behavior, and then we have to consider? I assume then we're considering a quick build. Is there a cost differential in doing it that way that's greater than just doing a quick build to begin with? So if it's 85,000 more now, is it just 85,000 more if we need to implement the quick build after we've done the striping, or is it 85 plus?
Yeah, I'm not sure the exact answer to that question, but
That's a good answer too, because that's one of the
yeah.
things like I'm struggling with to understand, probably something I want to have a better understanding of.
What I can say is what we were discussing earlier, and that is if we go with the striping only, it wouldn't take a lot for us to cover up some of that striping with some of the quick build elements. And again, that could be done with borough forces, so it wouldn't require. I think I'm not sure what elements in the design are driving the cost up between the quick build and the striping. I mean, there's obviously not a huge difference, but there is a difference. So I'd probably need to talk to Dawood a little bit more closely about what that difference is.
Okay, and it would be helpful to probably start fleshing out how we implement this from an operational standpoint, what the cost is in that, because those are all things I'd like to factor into the decision even at this stage if possible.
When you don't have a borough that's so supportive of this type of work, there's tactical urbanism, and people have used everything from like toilet plungers to to show like the lines of things. But I'm just thinking of even myself. I drive different vehicles, and they're different lengths, and sometimes I park farther ahead than I think I am because I'm in a different vehicle, and then I'll get out and then I'll move my car again. And anyway, but I'm also thinking of even temporary things that could also be celebratory, of having some sort of sparkly bedazzled, you know what I mean? Like here's our bike lane, but also like there's something visual just for at least the initial portion, so it doesn't have to be something that's there all the time, but even like the winner of a race, but let's not go through it. But something that's more that the cars that are parking can see it, and then you sort of get that understanding of like, oh, this is how far I can go, and this is where the line is, and I know when I'm, because if you don't have a curb, a parking stop that your tire hits to know. So just some things like that I think that if we would go still with just the paint, that there could be some creative elements that when it's open, like that there could be visual reminders for cars so that they would be able to know their limit. Because that's the key also, is like, is there going to be too much encroachment that it becomes a problem? I don't know. I just think that thinking ahead, that when it happens, like if there's additional things that could be very temporary, but could also be, fun and celebratory, just to give that visual barrier.
Any other questions
I
or
think
comments?
Mitch has. He's
Oh,
going.
I was just gonna say, you know, I think like the flexi posts are nice, but like I was gonna see if I could find it, but I've got pictures of like cars in Philadelphia that still park in the bike lane when there's flexi posts. Like they'll just drive over them, like they're parked, you know, halfway on the sidewalk and halfway in the bike lane.
Philadelphians are crazy.
Yeah, I mean it's I think people are a little bit more
Right, Chief?
a little bit more courteous here, but you know, also not, you know. So you know, I've run into some drivers that are not, you know,
Not kind to bicycle riders.
yeah.
Right.
So I don't know. Yeah, I think I do like this vulcanized rubber speed bumps just because it's sort of like they kind of seem pretty indestructible, and it's like the fact that they could be, you know, the flexi posts, I see them, like there's ones in Harrisburg that are already trashed. You know, they probably were put back like a year ago, and then they get run over again several times by a vehicle, and they're kind of ruined. So the rubber bumpers seem like just kind of like a really smart idea. So
When I think Brendan asked about like timeline wise, when you said a year, is that conceptually like design taking a year, or like if we, you know, say this is on the agenda at the April council meeting, council votes to move forward with one of the options, like for example the striping only, is the idea that then like we would have design work done within a year, or like the project would ideally start in a year, or kind of like I guess I'm just kind of trying to flesh out like timeline, like not only how long would it take for design, but then also when would work potentially start, and also just being mindful of like the existing road work going on at the intersection at the top of North Hanover, and being mindful of that, and kind of how this would fit in with that timeline.
I'm very glad that you brought that up. Thank you. Yeah, we wouldn't be making any physical changes in the field, even striping only. We wouldn't want to implement that until Project 1 was complete. So the timing actually would work out pretty well. If design, and I was estimating design taking a year, but I'm thinking like if you were to vote on an option at the April meeting, and then it takes we'll just say a month to get the paperwork taken care of, and then they start. I'm just thinking it would take about a year until we had design documents that had been previously brought to council and shared and approved, and yeah, so that's and of course Project 1. We know that it's not going to be done before December of this year, and so again, the timing would probably work out pretty well in terms of going to construction. If we if we start the design process now, I think we'll be ready to implement once Project 1's done.
Anything else? All right. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it. There is no new business. Steph, do we have any public comment? Any hands raised? But her hand wasn't up, so we didn't. It's our usual fan. Right. Good. Okay. All right. Any public comment here in Borough Hall? Okay. I see none. Then we are adjourned. Thank you all.